When 17-year-old Clara Hartwell was sold twice in one afternoon, first as a cruel joke to a gambling stranger, then rescued by a mysterious cowboy who paid far more than any damaged goods was worth. She thought her fate was sealed by others' choices. But as Clara discovers the shocking truth about her hidden inheritance and Daniel Crenshaw's real motives for saving her from a life of humiliation, she must face the most dangerous question of all. When you've been blind to your own worth for so long, how do you learn to see the light that was always burning within? The smell of burning wood and rotting vegetables filled Clara Hartwell's nose as she sat behind the counter of her father's store. Outside, horses stomped their feet on the dusty ground of Millbrook, Kansas. It was October 1867, and the autumn wind made the wooden walls creak like old bones. Clara's fingers moved across the smooth surface of a small wooden bird. Her mother had carved it for her before the fever took her sight 3 years ago. Back then, Clara could see the tiny feathers her mother had shaped with such care. Now she could only feel them. "That girl is costing us money, Henry," came her stepmother's sharp voice from the back room. "She can't see to help customers. She can't cook without burning things. What good is she?" Clara's heart sank. These conversations happen more often now. Her stepmother, Martha, never bothered to whisper when she complained about Clara being a burden. "Martha, please," her father said in his tired voice. "She's my daughter." "She's dead weight," Martha shot back. "No man will marry a blind girl. We'll be feeding her until we're in the ground." Clara gripped the wooden bird tighter. She knew Martha was right about one thing. In 1867, a woman who couldn't see was considered broken. Damaged goods, as the townspeople whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. The bell above the front door rang as someone entered. Heavy boots crossed the wooden floor. Clara could tell by the sound that the person was tall and walked with confidence. "Afternoon," said a man's voice. It was smooth like honey but had something dangerous underneath. "Name's Marcus Vale. I'm looking for Henry Hartwell." "That's me," Clara's father said, coming out from the back room. His voice sounded nervous. "What can I do for you, Mr. Vale?" Clara heard the scrape of a chair as the stranger sat down. "I hear you have a daughter who needs a husband." The wooden bird almost slipped from Clara's fingers. Her heart started beating fast. "I'm sorry," her father stammered. "Don't play dumb, Henry. Word travels fast in small towns. Your girl there," Marcus pointed in Clara's direction, "needs a man. I need a wife. Seems like we can help each other." Clara felt her cheeks burn with shame. This stranger was talking about her like she was a horse for sale. "Sir, I don't think you understand," her father began. "Oh, I understand perfectly." Marcus's voice turned cold. "You've got a blind daughter who can't take care of herself. I've got $50 and a bottle of good whiskey. Seems like a fair trade to me." Clara's mouth fell open. $50. That's what this man thought she was worth. "You can't be serious," her father said, but his voice wavered. "Dead serious. I travel from town to town, and I need someone to cook and clean. Your daughter needs a roof over her head. We both get what we need." Clara heard her stepmother's footsteps coming closer. $50, you said? "Martha," her father warned. "What? It's more than we'll ever get from anyone else. Look at her, Henry. She's 17 and can't even sweep the floor without knocking things over." Tears stung Clara's eyes. Her own stepmother was ready to sell her to a complete stranger. "I'll throw in the whiskey if you decide today," Marcus added. "I'm leaving town tomorrow morning." Clara listened to the silence that followed. She could hear her father's heavy breathing, her stepmother's impatient tapping, and the stranger's calm waiting. Her whole future hung in the air like dust motes dancing in sunlight she couldn't see. "She'll need time to pack," her father finally said, and Clara's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "No need. What she's wearing is fine. We'll get married at the courthouse tomorrow morning, and then we'll be on our way." Clara stood up suddenly, the wooden bird clutched in her fist. "Don't I get a say in this?" The room went quiet. She felt everyone's eyes on her, but she couldn't see their faces. "Sit down, Clara," Martha said sharply. "Adults are talking." "I am an adult." Clara's voice shook with anger and fear. You're selling me like a cow at market. You're being dramatic, Martha replied. Mr. Vale is offering you a chance at marriage. You should be grateful. Grateful. Clara wanted to laugh, but no sound came out. She was supposed to be grateful that a stranger wanted to buy her for the price of a good horse. The deal is done, Marcus said, standing up. Clara heard coins hitting the wooden counter. I'll see you at the courthouse tomorrow at 9 o'clock sharp. His boots clicked across the floor, and the bell rang as he left. Clara stood frozen in place, listening to her father count the money that had just bought her future. It's for the best, Clara, her father said softly. You need someone to take care of you. But Clara wasn't listening anymore. She was thinking about the wooden bird in her hand and what her mother used to say about birds finding their way home even in the darkest storms. Tomorrow she would find out if that was really true. The courthouse smelled like old papers and stale tobacco. Clara sat on a hard wooden bench, wearing her only good dress, a plain brown thing that Martha had sewn for her last Christmas. Her hands were folded in her lap, but her fingers kept finding the wooden bird hidden in her pocket. Judge Crawford shuffled papers at his desk while Marcus paced by the window. Clara could hear his boots clicking on the floor in an impatient rhythm. He'd barely spoken to her since arriving, treating her more like a package he was picking up than a woman he was about to marry. Where are the witnesses? Judge Crawford asked in a bored voice. I'll grab a couple folks from the street, Marcus replied. Won't take but a minute. Clara heard him leave and return with two men who sounded like they'd been drinking. One of them giggled when Marcus handed him a nickel. This is really happening? Clara whispered to herself. What was that? Judge Crawford asked. Nothing, sir. The judge cleared his throat and began reading from a book. The words washed over Clara like muddy water. She tried to listen, but all she could think about was her mother's voice telling her that she was worth more than other people's opinions. Do you, Marcus Vale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Marcus said quickly. And do you, Clara Hartwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Clara opened her mouth, but no words came out. This was her last chance to say no. Her last chance to refuse. But what choice did she really have? Where would she go? What would she do? She began. The courthouse door burst open with a bang that made everyone jump. Heavy footsteps entered, and Clara smelled leather and fresh air and something else. Something that reminded her of safety. Hold on there, stranger. The voice was deep and calm, but it carried authority like thunder before lightning. Clara turned her head toward the sound, wishing desperately that she could see who was speaking. We're in the middle of a ceremony here, Judge Crawford said irritably. I can see that, the newcomer replied. Daniel Crenshaw's the name. I couldn't help but overhear your business arrangement in the hotel last night. Clara's heart jumped. This man had heard Marcus talking about buying her? This is none of your concern, Cowboy, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Isn't it? Daniel stepped closer. Clara could feel his presence like warmth from a fire. Seems to me a lady deserves better than being gambled away like a poker chip. One of the drunk witnesses hiccuped. What's he talking about? Marcus's boots moved nervously on the floor. Look, mister, this is all legal and proper. The lady's father sold her to me fair and square. Sold her? Daniel's voice turned dangerous. Like property? Clara felt her cheeks burn. Yes, that's exactly what had happened, but hearing it said out loud made it sound even worse. She's damaged goods, Marcus protested. Can't see, can't work proper. I'm doing her a favor. The silence that followed was so thick Clara could almost touch it. Then Daniel spoke again, and his voice was quiet but firm. Ma'am, is this what you want? No one had asked Clara that question. Not her father, not her stepmother, not Marcus, not even the judge. This stranger was the first person to care about her opinion. Clara's voice caught in her throat. She doesn't know what she wants, Marcus interrupted. She's just a blind girl who needs someone to take care of her. Let her speak, Daniel said sharply. Clara felt tears building behind her eyes. What did she want? She wanted to see again. She wanted her real mother back. She wanted to feel valuable instead of worthless. But none of those things were possible. I want. She started, then stopped. What was the point? Even if she said no, where would she go? She's legally mine now, Marcus said triumphantly. Judge Crawford just pronounced us man and wife. Did he? Daniel asked. Because I don't recall hearing the lady say, I do. Judge Crawford coughed. Well, technically, the ceremony isn't complete until both parties give their consent. Marcus cursed under his breath. Fine. Clara, say I do, so we can get out of here. All eyes turned to Clara. She could feel their attention like hot sunlight on her face. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. She began again. Take your time, ma'am, Daniel said gently. This is your choice. Your choice. When was the last time Clara had been given a real choice about anything? She thought about the wooden bird in her pocket, about her mother's words, about the life stretching ahead of her with Marcus. But she also thought about this stranger's voice, about the way he'd called her ma'am instead of blind girl, about how he'd asked what she wanted. Maybe, just maybe, there was another option she hadn't considered. The leather pouch hit Judge Crawford's desk with a sound that made everyone's breath catch. Clara heard Marcus gasp as coins spilled out, clinking and rolling across the wooden surface like musical notes. $200, Daniel said calmly. Cash money. Clara's knees nearly gave out. $200 was more money than most people in Millbrook saw in a whole year. Her father's store didn't make that much profit in 6 months. You're joking? Marcus stammered. But Clara could hear the greed creeping into his voice. Do I sound like a man who jokes about money? Daniel asked. $200, and the lady gets to choose her own future. Judge Crawford whistled low. That's a considerable sum, Mr. Crenshaw. Clara's mind raced. Why would a stranger pay so much for her? What did he want in return? Men didn't spend that kind of money without expecting something back. What's your game, cowboy? Marcus demanded. Nobody pays $200 for damaged goods. Watch your tongue. Daniel's voice turned ice cold. You're talking about a lady. The drunk witnesses shuffled their feet nervously. One of them burped and mumbled something about wanting to leave. Clara felt trapped between these two men haggling over her like she was a prize cow at auction. But there was something different about Daniel's offer. He'd said she could choose her own future. That was more than Marcus had ever promised. I don't understand, Clara said quietly. Why would you do this? Daniel's boots moved closer. Because every person deserves respect, ma'am. And because I've got a ranch that could use a woman's touch if you're willing. A ranch? Clara's heart skipped. She'd never been outside Millbrook except for trips to the creek with her mother years ago. 30 miles west of here. It's not fancy, but it's honest work and clean living. You'd have your own room, your own space. No pressure, no demands. Marcus laughed bitterly. You expect me to believe you'd pay $200 and ask nothing in return? I expect you to take the money and leave the lady alone, Daniel replied firmly. Clara listened to the men argue about her fate while her thoughts swirled like leaves in a windstorm. This morning she'd been a burden in her father's house. Now 2 strangers were fighting over who would take her. But Daniel's offer sounded different. He spoke of respect and choice, words she hadn't heard in years. Ma'am. Daniel's voice pulled her from her thoughts. The decision is yours to make. Clara reached into her pocket and touched the wooden bird. What would her mother do? What would a woman with courage do? If I go with you, she said carefully, what would you expect from me? Honesty, Daniel replied without hesitation. And whatever help you're comfortable giving around the ranch. Nothing more, nothing less. And if I wanted to leave someday, then you'd be free to go. I'm not buying a person, ma'am. I'm offering a partnership. Partnership. The word tasted strange in Clara's mouth. No one had ever offered her a partnership before. Marcus snorted. She's blind, Crenshaw. What kind of partnership can you have with someone who can't see? Clara felt her cheeks burn with familiar shame, but then Daniel spoke up. Seems to me she's got better vision than most people in this room. She can see right through your lies, for starters." The drunk witnesses giggled. Even Judge Crawford cracked a smile. "So what'll it be, Vale?" Daniel continued. $200? Or do you want to explain to the sheriff why you're trying to force a woman into marriage against her will?" Clara heard Marcus curse under his breath. She knew he was thinking about the money, more than he'd ever had at one time. "Fine," Marcus said finally. "But when she becomes too much trouble for you, don't come crying to me." "I'll take that risk," Daniel replied. Judge Crawford cleared his throat. "Well then, I suppose we need to make some legal changes here. Miss Hartwell, do you consent to this new arrangement?" Clara stood up slowly, her legs shaking. This was the moment everything would change. She could go with Marcus and live as his property, or trust a stranger who spoke of respect and partnership. She thought about her mother's words about birds finding their way home. Maybe home wasn't always the place you came from. Maybe sometimes it was the place you chose to go. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I consent." The paperwork took another hour. Clara listened to the scratch of pens and the rustle of papers while Daniel and Judge Crawford worked out the legal details. Marcus took his money and left without another word, slamming the door behind him. When everything was finished, Clara found herself standing outside the courthouse with a man she'd never seen. The afternoon sun warmed her face while the sounds of Millbrook swirled around her horses. Wagons, people going about their daily business. "I've got a wagon waiting," Daniel said gently. "We can head to the ranch whenever you're ready." Clara nodded, then realized she had nowhere to collect her belongings. Everything she owned was either on her back or in her pocket. "I don't have much to pack," she admitted. "That's all right. We'll figure out what you need as we go." As they walked toward the wagon, Clara heard familiar voices approaching. Her heart sank as she recognized her father and stepmother. "Clara," her father called out, "what's this we hear about you leaving with some stranger?" Martha's voice was sharp with anger. "Henry paid good money for a wedding, and now you're running off with another man?" Daniel stepped slightly closer to Clara, not touching but making his presence known. "The lady made her choice freely and legally," he said politely but firmly. "She's not thinking clearly," Martha snapped. "She's just a child who doesn't understand the world." "I understand enough," Clara said, finding her voice. "I understand that you sold me like livestock. I understand that you never once asked what I wanted." Her father's voice turned pleading. "Clara, be reasonable. You don't know anything about this man. At least Marcus seemed reliable." "Reliable?" Clara almost laughed. "He wanted to buy me for $50 and a bottle of whiskey. That's $50 more than you're worth to anyone else," Martha said cruelly. The words hit Clara like a physical blow, but before she could respond, Daniel spoke up. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to stop talking to my partner that way." Partner. There was that word again, and hearing Daniel use it in front of her family made Clara stand a little straighter. "Partner?" her father repeated, confused. "That's right," Daniel said calmly. "Miss Hartwell and I are entering into a business arrangement. She'll be helping me run my ranch." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. He was defending her, treating her like she had value. "You're making a mistake, Clara," Martha warned. "When this doesn't work out, don't come crying to us." "I won't," Clara replied, and for the first time in years she meant it. The wagon wheels creaked a steady rhythm as they rolled away from Millbrook. Clara sat beside Daniel on the hard wooden seat, acutely aware of the space between them and the vast unknown stretching ahead. The afternoon sun felt different out here, bigger somehow, without buildings to block its warmth. "Tell me about your ranch," Clara said, partly to break the silence and partly because she genuinely wanted to know what her new life would look like. "It's called Willow Creek," Daniel replied, and she could hear the pride in his voice. "Got about 300 acres, maybe 40 head of cattle, and the prettiest stand of willow trees you've ever seen growing along the water." Clara smiled sadly. "I'll have to take your word on the pretty part." "Maybe," Daniel said thoughtfully, "but pretty isn't just about what you see with your eyes. The willows make this sound when the wind moves through them, like whispers telling secrets. And the creek runs so clear you can hear every pebble on the bottom. As if summoned by his words, Clara began to notice sounds she'd missed while living in town. Bird calls that seemed to go on forever. The rustle of grass in the wind. The distant lowing of cattle. Her world had been so small in Millbrook, contained within the walls of her father's store. Out here it felt endless. "What kind of help do you need on a ranch?" she asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Well, there's cooking, if you're inclined. Tending the vegetable garden. Gathering eggs from the chickens. Mending clothes. Keeping the house clean." Clara's heart sank. It sounded like the same work she'd struggled with at home. All the tasks that required seeing clearly. "I'm not very good at those things," she admitted. "I burn food and break dishes and trip over everything." "Maybe that's because you were trying to do them the way sighted folks do," Daniel suggested. "Might be there are different ways to get the same jobs done." "Different ways?" "Sure. My grandmother was blind the last few years of her life, but she could cook better than anyone I knew. She did everything by touch and smell and sound. Said she could tell when bread was done just by listening to it bake." Clara had never heard of such a thing. "Really? Really? She taught me that there's more than one way to see the world." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Clara found herself relaxing for the first time in months. Daniel didn't seem to expect her to be anything other than what she was. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Of course. Why did you really pay all that money for me? And don't say it was just about respect. $200 is a lot of money." Daniel's hands shifted on the reins. "You want the honest truth? Please. I was married once before," he said quietly. "My wife died in childbirth 2 years ago. The baby too." Clara's breath caught. She hadn't expected such a personal revelation. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Thank you." Her name was Rebecca. She was everything good in the world. His voice grew rough with emotion. "After she died, I figured I'd spend the rest of my life alone. Seemed fitting somehow." "What changed your mind?" "This morning at the hotel, I heard Marcus talking to his drinking buddies about his joke marriage, and how he was going to have some fun with his blind pet, before selling you off to whoever would pay the most." Clara's blood ran cold. "He was going to sell me again?" "That was his plan. Said a blind woman would fetch good money in certain establishments." Clara felt sick. She thought Marcus just wanted a housekeeper, but his intentions had been far worse. "I couldn't let that happen," Daniel continued. "Not to anyone, but especially not to someone who reminded me so much of Rebecca." "I remind you of your wife?" "Not in looks," he said quickly, "but in spirit. Rebecca had this way of seeing the best in everything, even when times were hard. When she lost her sight would have broken some people, but she just adapted, found new ways to do things. You've got that same strength." Clara didn't feel strong. She felt scared and uncertain and completely out of her depth. But something about Daniel's quiet confidence made her want to try. "What if I disappoint you?" she asked. "What if you don't?" They crested a small hill, and Clara heard Daniel take a sharp breath. "What is it?" she asked. "Riders coming up fast behind us," he said grimly. 3 of them. Clara's heart began to pound. "Is it trouble?" "Maybe. Probably." Daniel's voice stayed calm, but she could feel tension radiating from him. "There's a rifle under the seat if things go bad. Can you handle a gun?" "I've never tried." "Then let's hope you won't have to." The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. Clara gripped the wooden bird in her pocket like a talisman while Daniel guided their wagon to a stop. Well, came a familiar voice that made Clara's stomach drop. "Fancy meeting you folks out here. Marcus." He'd followed them. "You're not welcome here, Vale," Daniel said evenly. "Now that's not very friendly," Marcus replied, and Clara could hear the false cheer in his voice. "I just wanted to make sure my former bride was being treated properly. She's fine. Move along." "See, that's where we have a problem." Marcus's voice turned dangerous. "I've been thinking about our little transaction, and I realized I might have been too hasty. That's a lot of money you paid for damaged goods. What do you want? Daniel asked. I want her back, Marcus said simply. And I want my money back too. Clara felt the wagon sway as Daniel shifted his weight. That's not going to happen. I figured you might say that, which is why I brought some friends to help change your mind. Clara heard the distinctive sound of guns being drawn. Her mouth went dry with fear. You're making a mistake, Daniel warned. The only mistake I made was selling too cheap, Marcus replied. Now, you can hand over the girl and the money peaceful-like, or we can do this the hard way. Clara's mind raced. She was the reason Daniel was in danger. If she went with Marcus willingly, maybe he'd leave Daniel alone. I'll go, she said quietly. No, Daniel said firmly. You won't. But if I don't, they'll hurt you. Maybe. But I'd rather take that chance than let you be hurt for certain. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. When had anyone ever been willing to fight for her? This is touching and all, Marcus said impatiently. But I'm losing daylight. What's it going to be, Crenshaw? Daniel's answer came in the form of action rather than words. Clara heard him grab the rifle and felt the wagon lurch as he dove for cover behind it. Clara, get down, he shouted. Gunshots exploded around them like thunder, and Clara's new life hung in the balance between courage and greed, between the past that haunted her and the future she dared to hope for. Bullets whistled over Clara's head as she pressed herself flat against the wagon bed. Wood splintered around her while Daniel returned fire from behind the wagon wheel. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, sharp and dangerous. Stay down, Daniel shouted over the noise. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd never been in a gunfight before. The sounds were overwhelming, gunshots cracking like whips, men yelling, horses neighing in fear. She couldn't tell where anyone was or what was happening. A bullet thudded into the wagon inches from her head. Clara bit back a scream and crawled toward where she thought Daniel might be. How many bullets do you have left? She called out. Not enough, Daniel replied grimly. These boys came prepared for a fight. Marcus's voice rang out across the prairie. Give it up, Crenshaw. You're outnumbered 3-1. 4-1 if you count the lady. Daniel shouted back. And she's worth 10 of you. Despite her terror, Clara felt a warm glow at his words. No one had ever called her worth anything before. More gunshots exploded around them. Clara heard one of Marcus's men curse loudly. Daniel had hit something. Jimmy's been shot, the man yelled. Then finish this quick, Marcus snarled. Clara's mind raced. They were trapped behind the wagon with limited ammunition while Marcus had more men and more guns. Unless something changed soon, this wouldn't end well. Then she remembered something her mother used to tell her about wild animals. When cornered, even the smallest creature could be dangerous if it was clever enough. Daniel, she whispered urgently. Where are the horses? Our team? They ran off when the shooting started. Why? Not ours. Theirs. Where did they leave their horses? Daniel peeked around the wagon wheel. About 50 yards to the east. They tied them to a scrub oak. What are you thinking? Clara felt around until her fingers found a handful of small rocks. I'm thinking scared horses make a lot of noise and confusion. Clara, no. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than staying here until they run out of patience? She gripped the wooden bird for luck. My mother always said I had good aim when we played games. Maybe it's time to find out if she was right. Before Daniel could stop her, Clara began crawling away from the wagon. She moved slowly, feeling her way across the rough ground. Every few seconds, gunfire erupted above her, but she kept moving toward where Daniel said the horses were tied. The shooting stopped suddenly. Clara froze, her heart pounding so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. Crenshaw, Marcus called out. I'm getting tired of this game. Send out the girl, and maybe I'll let you live. Counteroffer, Daniel replied. You ride away now, and maybe I won't put a bullet between your eyes. Marcus laughed nastily. Big talk for a man hiding behind a wagon. Clara used the distraction to keep crawling. The ground felt different here, softer, with more grass. She could smell horses now, that familiar mixture of leather and hay and animal sweat. A horse whinnied nervously somewhere ahead of her. Clara smiled. She was close. She felt around until her fingers found the base of the scrub oak. The horses were tied just above her head, shifting restlessly as they sensed the danger in the air. Clara picked up the largest rock she could find and took careful aim at where she thought the horse's legs might be. Her mother had taught her to throw by sound when they played games in the yard years ago. Time to see if those skills still worked. She threw the rock as hard as she could. It struck something solid, and immediately one of the horses reared up with a terrified whinny. The sound spooked the other horses, and within seconds all three animals were bucking and pulling against their ropes. "What the hell?" one of Marcus's men shouted. Clara threw another rock, then another. The horses panicked completely, breaking free from their ties and galloping away across the prairie. "The horses are running," someone yelled. "Catch them, you idiots!" Marcus screamed. Clara heard Boots running in different directions as Marcus's men chased after their mounts. In the confusion, she began crawling back toward the wagon as fast as she could. Strong hands grabbed her arms and pulled her to safety behind the wagon wheel. "That was the bravest, most foolish thing I've ever seen," Daniel said, but his voice was full of admiration. "Did it work?" "Like a charm. They're scattered all over creation chasing horses. But Marcus is still out there somewhere." As if summoned by his name, Marcus's voice came from much closer than before. "Clever girl. But now you've just made me angrier." Clara could tell he was moving, trying to get around the wagon to where they were hiding. "This ends now, Crenshaw," Marcus called out. "You and me face to face. Winner takes everything." "Don't do it," Clara whispered. "It's a trap." "Maybe," Daniel replied quietly, "but it might be our only chance." He pressed the rifle into Clara's hands. "If something happens to me, you point this toward any sound that isn't my voice and pull the trigger. Can you do that?" Clara's hands shook as she gripped the unfamiliar weapon. "I don't want you to go." "I know, but some fights can't be avoided." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Besides, I've got something worth fighting for now." Before Clara could respond, Daniel stepped out from behind the wagon. "All right, Vale," he called out. "You want to settle this? Let's settle it." Clara heard their boots moving across the ground, circling each other like wolves. Her finger found the trigger of the rifle while she strained to listen for any sound that might tell her what was happening. "You know," Marcus said conversationally, "I almost admire you, Crenshaw. Most men wouldn't risk their lives for damaged goods." "Most men don't know quality when they see it," Daniel replied. "Quality?" Marcus laughed. "She's a blind girl who can't even cook without burning down the house. She's braver than any 10 men I know, including you." The gunshots came so close together they sounded like one long explosion. Clara screamed and raised the rifle, but she couldn't tell who had one. Footsteps approached the wagon. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. "Clara?" came Daniel's voice, rough with pain. "It's over." She nearly sobbed with relief as she lowered the rifle. "Are you hurt?" "Just a scratch on my arm. Marcus won't be bothering anyone anymore." Clara heard him collapse against the wagon wheel, breathing hard. In the distance, she could hear Marcus's men calling to each other as they rounded up their scattered horses. "They'll be back," Daniel said grimly. "We need to get moving." As Clara helped him bandage his wounded arm with strips torn from her dress, she realized something had changed. For the first time in her life, someone had fought for her. Someone had seen her as worth defending. The wooden bird felt warm in her pocket as they climbed back onto the wagon. Her mother had been right about birds finding their way home. Sometimes you just had to be brave enough to fly. 3 weeks later, Clara stood in the kitchen of Daniel's ranch house, flour dusting her hands as she kneaded bread dough by touch. The morning sun streamed through windows she couldn't see, but she could feel its warmth on her shoulders and hear the gentle sounds of ranch life beginning another day. Outside, Daniel was working with the cattle, and his voice drifted through the open door as he called to his animals. Clara had learned to recognize each distinct sound of the ranch, the lowing of different cows, the creak of the windmill, the splash of the creek running clear and cold past the house. The bread felt ready under her fingers, smooth and elastic the way Daniel's grandmother had described in the notes he'd found in her old recipe book. Clara shaped it into loaves and slid them into the oven, timing the baking by the sound of the bubbling crust, just as the old woman had taught through her written words. A wet nose nudged Clara's hand, and she smiled as she reached down to pet Buck, Daniel's border collie. The dog had appointed himself her guardian and guide, rarely leaving her side as she learned to navigate her new home. "Morning, Buck," she said softly. "Ready for breakfast?" Buck's tail thumped against the floor as Clara felt her way to the pantry. She'd memorized the location of everything in the kitchen, creating a mental map that let her work without constantly fumbling for tools and ingredients. The front door opened, and Clara heard Daniel's boots on the wooden floor. "Something smells incredible in here," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Fresh bread and bacon," Clara replied, pride warming her chest. "And coffee that's actually drinkable this time. You've been practicing." Your grandmother's notes helped. She wrote down everything. How long to cook bacon by the sound of the sizzling. How to tell when coffee is ready by the smell. How bread dough should feel when it's ready to bake. Daniel moved closer, and Clara caught the scent of hay and morning air that always clung to him after his early chores. "She would have liked you," he said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because she always said the best cooks were the ones who used all their senses, not just their eyes. She'd have been impressed by how fast you've learned." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. Compliments still surprised her. They'd been so rare in her old life. "There's something I need to tell you," Daniel said, his tone growing serious. Clara's hands stilled on the coffee pot. "What is it?" "I rode into town yesterday for supplies. Ran into Judge Crawford at the general store." Clara's stomach tightened. Any news from town usually meant trouble. "He told me something interesting about your family," Daniel continued. "About your real father." "My real father died when I was small," Clara said carefully. "I barely remember him." "That's what I thought too. But Judge Crawford says your father left a will. A will that your stepmother and stepfather never told you about." The coffee pot nearly slipped from Clara's hands. "What kind of will?" "The kind that leaves a considerable inheritance to his daughter when she comes of age. You turned 17 last month, which means legally that money belongs to you now." Clara sank into a chair, her mind reeling. "How much money?" "Enough to buy your own land. Enough to live independently if that's what you choose." The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Clara's thoughts tumbled over each other like rocks in a landslide. Money. Independence. Choices she'd never imagined having. "Why didn't they tell me?" she whispered. "Because as long as you thought you were dependent on them, they could control you. But the moment you knew about your inheritance, you'd have the power to leave." Clara felt anger building in her chest, hot and fierce and long overdue. "They let me think I was worthless. They sold me to Marcus for $50 when I had enough money to take care of myself." "That's about the size of it," Daniel agreed grimly. "How long have you known?" "Since yesterday. I wanted to tell you right away, but I also wanted to think about what it meant." Clara looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful and measured. "It means you have choices now, Clara. Real choices. You could go anywhere, do anything. Buy a house in San Francisco or Denver. Hire people to help you. Live like a lady of leisure if you wanted." Each word felt like a door opening in Clara's mind. Freedom. Independence. The power to shape her own destiny. But as the possibilities swirled around her, one thought kept returning. She looked toward where Daniel's voice had come from, wishing desperately that she could see his face. "Is that what you think I should do?" she asked quietly. "What I think doesn't matter," Daniel replied. "It's your decision to make. But it does matter. To me." Another long silence stretched between them. Clara could hear Buck's breathing, the bubble of bread baking in the oven, the distant sound of cattle in the pasture. I think, Daniel said finally, that you should do whatever makes you happy. And if staying here doesn't make you happy, what if it does? Clara interrupted. What if I want to stay? Then you'd be welcome for as long as you want. Even though you don't need my inheritance money? I never needed your money, Clara. I needed. He paused, as if searching for the right words. I needed someone who made this place feel like a home again. Clara's heart began beating faster. And do I? Make it feel like home. You make it feel like more than home, Daniel said softly. You make it feel like the place I want to spend the rest of my life. The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. Clara stood up slowly, her hand trailing along the table edge until she found Daniel's arm. I want to stay, she said clearly. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. Because this ranch, this life, you make me feel valuable in a way that has nothing to do with money. She felt Daniel's hand cover hers, warm and calloused and gentle. Are you sure? He asked. Really sure? Because once you make this choice, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you never regret it. Clara smiled, thinking of her mother's wooden bird upstairs in her room, of the bread baking in the oven, of the morning sun warming her shoulders and the man whose voice had become the sound of home. I'm sure, she said. I'm finally sure. Outside, Buck barked once at something in the distance. Whether in approval or protest, neither of them cared to find out. They had more important things to think about, like the future they were choosing to build together and the love that had grown between them as naturally as willows by a stream. The sound of approaching horses shattered the peaceful morning like glass hitting stone. Clara froze at the kitchen window, her hands gripping the curtain as hoofbeats thundered closer to the ranch house. It had been 2 months since the gunfight with Marcus, and she'd almost let herself believe the danger was over. Daniel, she called out, but he was already running from the barn, his boots pounding across the yard. Get inside and lock the door, he shouted. Now! Clara's heart hammered as she backed away from the window. Through the thin walls, she could hear voices, several men talking in low, urgent tones. One voice made her blood turn to ice. Her stepfather, Henry. We know she's here, Crenshaw. Henry's voice carried across the yard. We've come to take our daughter home. Clara pressed herself against the kitchen wall, her mind racing. Why would Henry come all this way? And why did he sound so different, harder, more determined than she'd ever heard him? Clara's exactly where she wants to be, Daniel replied firmly. She's free to make her own choices. Not anymore, came another voice, one Clara didn't recognize. The girl's marriage to you was never legal. She was already promised to Marcus Vale before you interfered. Clara's stomach dropped. Legal problems. She'd hoped they were done with legal problems. Through the door, she heard Daniel's voice turn dangerous. Marcus Vale is dead. Has been for 2 months. Which is why we're here, the stranger continued. I'm Samuel Morrison, Mr. Vale's business partner. When Marcus died, his debts became my responsibility, including his marriage contract with the Hartwell girl. Marriage contract. Clara had never heard of such a thing. There's no contract, Daniel said. Henry sold his daughter for $50 and a bottle of whiskey. That's not a legal marriage arrangement. Henry's voice turned defensive. There was a proper contract drawn up beforehand. Marcus paid good money for the girl's hand in marriage. When he died, that contract transferred to his business partner. Clara felt sick. They were talking about her like she was property again, something to be bought and sold and transferred between men like a cow or a piece of land. Show me this supposed contract, Daniel demanded. Clara heard papers rustling in the wind. Morrison's voice was smug as he read aloud. Agreement between Henry Hartwell and Marcus Vale for the marriage of Clara Hartwell. Dated October 15, 1867. Payment of $50 received in full, with additional considerations of future financial support for the Hartwell family. Additional considerations? Daniel's voice was sharp. Marcus promised to send money to the Hartwells every month after the marriage, Morrison explained. When he died, those payments stopped. The family's in debt now, and they need the girl's inheritance to pay what they owe. Clara's inheritance. So that's what this was really about. Not marriage contracts or legal obligations, money. Her money. The girl inherited a considerable sum from her real father, Henry added, and Clara could hear the greed in his voice. As her legal guardian, I have the right to control that inheritance until she's properly married. She's 17, Daniel protested. She's of age. Not according to territorial law, Morrison said smoothly. Unmarried women remain under their father's authority until age 21, or until they marry with proper family consent. Clara's hands shook as she listened to the men argue about her fate. Once again, her life was being decided by others without anyone asking what she wanted. But this time was different. This time she had choices. Moving quietly, Clara felt her way to the kitchen drawer where Daniel kept important papers. Her fingers found what she was looking for, the marriage certificate from their courthouse wedding 2 months ago. The real marriage certificate, not the fake one Marcus had tried to claim. Clara took a deep breath and opened the front door. "Gentlemen," she said, stepping onto the porch. "I believe you're looking for me." The conversation stopped abruptly. Clara could feel their eyes on her, but she stood straight and tall, the marriage certificate clutched in her hand. "Clara," Henry's voice was falsely gentle. "Come along, dear. We're taking you home." "I am home," Clara replied clearly. "This ranch is my home now." "Don't be foolish, girl," Morrison snapped. "You have legal obligations to fulfill." "Actually, I don't," Clara said, holding up the marriage certificate. "I'm already married. Legally and properly married to Daniel Crenshaw, as recorded by Judge Crawford in Millbrook." She heard Henry's sharp intake of breath. "That marriage was a mistake. You were confused and frightened." "I was desperate," Clara corrected. "Desperate to escape the family that sold me like livestock and the man who wanted to treat me like property." "You ungrateful little," Henry started, but Morrison cut him off. "The marriage can be annulled," Morrison said coldly. "Marriages made under duress aren't legally binding." "Who says I was under duress?" Clara asked. "I chose to marry Daniel. I choose to stay married to Daniel. And I choose to live on this ranch as his wife." She felt Daniel move closer to her side, his presence warm and reassuring. "The girl doesn't understand the legal complexities," Morrison continued. "She needs proper guidance from male relatives who can." "I understand perfectly," Clara interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "You want my inheritance money to pay off debts that have nothing to do with me. You want to force me into a marriage with a dead man's business partner so you can control my finances." "Now see here," Henry protested. "No, you see here," Clara said, her years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. "I remember my real father. I remember how much he loved me, how he promised to always take care of me. He left me that inheritance so I'd never have to depend on people who saw me as a burden." Her voice carried across the yard, clear and determined. "I choose to stay with my husband on our ranch. I choose to use my inheritance to build a life here. And I choose to never see any of you again." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Clara could hear horses shifting restlessly, feel the weight of several men's anger pressing against her like a physical force. "This isn't over," Morrison said finally, his voice cold as winter wind. "Yes, it is." Daniel spoke for the first time since Clara had emerged. "The lady has made her choice. Time for you gentlemen to respect it and move along." "We'll see about that," Henry muttered. But Clara could hear defeat creeping into his voice. As the sound of horses faded into the distance, Clara remained on the porch, the marriage certificate still clutched in her trembling hand. She'd faced down her past and chosen her future, but she knew this was only the beginning of the fight for her freedom. That evening, Clara sat by the fireplace with her inheritance papers spread across the kitchen table. Daniel had ridden to town to speak with Judge Crawford about Morrison's legal threats, leaving Clara alone with Buck and her thoughts. The house felt different somehow, less like a safe haven and more like a fortress under siege. She traced her fingers across the legal documents, feeling the raised seal that made them official. According to Judge Crawford's explanation, her real father had left her enough money to buy 3 ranches the size of Daniel's. The number was staggering, more wealth than she'd ever imagined possessing. But with that wealth came danger. Morrison and Henry wouldn't give up easily, not with so much money at stake. A soft knock at the door made Clara's heart jump. Buck growled low in his throat, a warning that told her this wasn't Daniel returning. "Miss Clara?" came a woman's voice. "It's Emma Henderson from the neighboring ranch. My husband sent me to check on you." Clara relaxed slightly. She'd met Emma Henderson briefly when the woman had brought clothes for her weeks ago. The Hendersons were good neighbors, the kind who helped during cattle drives and shared supplies during harsh winters. Clara opened the door carefully, Buck pressing close to her side. "Mrs. Henderson," Clara said. "Daniel's in town, but please come in." Emma's skirts rustled as she entered the kitchen. Clara could smell fresh bread and soap, the comfortable sense of a woman who worked hard but took pride in her appearance. "I won't stay long," Emma said, settling into a chair. "But my husband thought you should know. Those men who visited you today? They stopped at our place asking questions." Clara's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "About your marriage to Daniel. About whether you seemed happy here or if you appeared to be kept against your will." "What did you tell them?" Emma's voice was firm. "I told them the truth. That I've never seen a woman more content with her life than you appear to be. That you and Daniel work together like a team, and that anyone with eyes can see you chose to be here." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. She'd worried that the neighboring families might see her as an oddity, the blind woman who'd been bought and sold like cattle. Instead, they saw her as Daniel's wife and partner. "There's something else," Emma continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That Morrison fellow offered my husband money for information about your daily routines. When you're alone, where you go, what time Daniel leaves for town." Clara's blood ran cold. "He's planning something. That's what we figured. Thomas, my husband, he told Morrison that you're never alone, that Daniel's always close by. But we thought you should know they're watching you." Clara nodded, her mind racing. Morrison was treating this like a business transaction, gathering information the way a cattle rustler might scout a ranch before making his move. "Mrs. Henderson," Clara said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear. Do you think I'm foolish for staying here? For choosing this life over the independence my inheritance could buy me?" Emma was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "My grandmother used to say that money can buy you a house, but it can't buy you a home. It can buy you servants, but it can't buy you people who truly care about your happiness." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "But I could go anywhere, do anything. I could live in a big city with doctors who might help my eyes, or travel to places I've only heard about in stories." "You could," Emma agreed. "But would any of those things make you as happy as you are here with Daniel?" The question hung in the air between them. Clara thought about the past 2 months, learning to cook without burning everything, helping with small ranch tasks, listening to Daniel's voice as he planned for their future together. "No," Clara said quietly. "Nothing would make me happier than this life." "Then you have your answer," Emma said simply. "The heart knows what it needs, even when the mind tries to convince it otherwise." After Emma left, Clara sat alone in the growing darkness. She'd made her choice, but she knew Morrison wouldn't accept it easily. Men like him saw women as property to be controlled, especially women with money. The sound of Daniel's horse returning made her heart lift. She heard him caring for his mount in the barn before his familiar footsteps crossed the yard. "How did it go?" Clara asked as he entered the kitchen. Daniel's heavy sigh told her the news wasn't good before he spoke. "Morrison filed papers with the territorial court," he said grimly. "He's claiming our marriage was fraudulent and demanding guardianship of you and your inheritance." Clara felt the walls closing in around her. "Can he do that?" "He can try. Judge Crawford thinks it's nonsense, but the territorial judge might see things differently, especially if Morrison's willing to pay the right bribes." Clara stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, night had fallen over the ranch, bringing with it new dangers and uncertainties. There's something else, Daniel continued reluctantly. Morrison's hired men to watch the ranch. Judge Crawford saw them setting up camp about a mile from here. Emma Henderson warned me about that. They came asking questions. Daniel moved closer, his hand finding her shoulder. Clara, maybe you should consider leaving for a while. You could go to Denver or San Francisco until this gets sorted out legally. No. Clara's voice was firm. I won't run. I won't let them chase me away from my home. But if Morrison's determined to take you by force, then we'll be ready for him, Clara interrupted. This is our ranch, our life. I'm not giving it up without a fight. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was full of admiration and worry in equal measure. You're the bravest woman I've ever known, he said softly. But brave doesn't stop bullets or legal papers. Clara turned toward his voice, reaching up to touch his face. Maybe not, but brave is all I have right now. Brave and stubborn and the absolute certainty that this is where I belong. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, its voice lonely and wild. Clara shivered, not from cold but from the knowledge that her fight for freedom was far from over. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to the life she'd chosen. But tonight, she stood in her own kitchen with her husband's arms around her, surrounded by the sounds and smells of home. Whatever came next, she would face it here, in the place where she'd learned that being blind didn't mean being helpless, and that sometimes the clearest sight comes from the heart. The crash of breaking glass woke Clara from a deep sleep. She bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering as Buck's fierce barking echoed through the house. Heavy footsteps pounded across the front porch, while men's voices shouted orders in the darkness. Daniel, Clara called out, but the space beside her in bed was empty and cold. More glass shattered downstairs. Clara scrambled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor as she fumbled for her robe. Through the bedroom window, she could hear horses snorting and men talking in hushed, urgent tones. Search every room, came Morrison's commanding voice from below. The girl's here somewhere. Clara's blood turned to ice. They'd come for her in the middle of the night, when Daniel was away checking on the cattle in the far pasture. She pressed herself against the bedroom wall, her mind racing for options. Buck's barking grew more frantic, then suddenly stopped with a yelp that made Clara's stomach drop. They'd hurt her faithful companion. Buck, she whispered, but there was no answering bark. Heavy boots climbed the stairs toward her room. Clara grabbed the wooden bird from her nightstand and clutched it tight, thinking desperately of escape routes. The window was too high to jump from safely, and the only way out was through the door where the men were coming. Miss Clara. Morrison's voice was sickeningly polite as he reached the top of the stairs. Time to come home. Clara backed toward the corner of the room, her shoulders hitting the wall. This is my home. Not anymore. Morrison's boots crossed the floor toward her. Your family's worried sick about you. They sent me to bring you back where you belong. My family sold me for $50, Clara replied, her voice stronger than she felt. They don't get to worry about me now. Now. Morrison's tone turned falsely gentle. You're just confused. All this nonsense about marriage and independence has addled your thinking. A good rest at home will set you right. Clara heard him signal to someone else in the hallway. Bring the rope. The girl's being difficult. Rope. They planned to tie her up like an animal. Clara's anger flared, burning away her fear. Don't you dare touch me, she warned. Morrison laughed. You're blind, girl. What exactly do you think you can do to stop me? Clara might not be able to see, but she knew every inch of this bedroom. She'd memorized the furniture placement, the creaky floorboards, the exact distance between the bed and the dresser. This was her territory, and she had advantages these men couldn't imagine. When Morrison reached for her, Clara ducked under his arm and rolled across the bed. She heard him curse as he stumbled into the space where she'd been standing. Get her, Morrison shouted to his men. Clara grabbed the heavy water pitcher from the washstand and hurled it toward Morrison's voice. She heard it connect with something solid, followed by a man's pained yell. She broke my nose, Morrison roared. Using the confusion, Clara darted toward the door. But another man caught her arm, his grip painful on her wrist. Got her, the man called out. Clara twisted in his grasp and brought her knee up hard. The man doubled over with a grunt, releasing her arm. She ran for the stairs, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Behind her, Morrison was shouting orders. Don't let her get away. Block the doors. Clara reached the bottom of the stairs and immediately tripped over something warm and furry. Buck. Her heart clenched as she felt for injuries, but the dog was breathing steadily. They'd knocked him unconscious but not killed him. There she is, someone yelled from the kitchen. Clara scrambled to her feet and ran toward the back door, but heavy footsteps cut off her escape. She was trapped between two groups of men, with nowhere left to run. End of the line, girl, Morrison said from the stairs, his voice thick from his broken nose. You've caused enough trouble for one night. Clara backed against the wall, clutching the wooden bird so tight its carved edges bit into her palm. They had her cornered, but she wasn't giving up without a fight. My husband will kill you for this, she warned. Your husband's about to have an accident with some angry cattle, Morrison replied coldly. Real shame how dangerous ranch work can be. Clara's world tilted. They weren't just kidnapping her. They were planning to murder Daniel. No, she whispered, then louder, no. Don't worry, Morrison continued mockingly. You won't be around to mourn him. Your new life starts tomorrow, far away from Kansas. Clara felt rage building in her chest like a prairie fire. These men thought they could steal her life, hurt the people she loved, and drag her back to a world where she was nothing but property. They were wrong. As Morrison stepped closer, Clara heard something that made her heart leap, the distant sound of approaching horses. Lots of horses moving fast. Morrison heard it too. What the hell? The front door exploded inward as armed men poured into the house. Clara recognized Thomas Henderson's voice shouting orders, followed by other neighbors she'd met over the past months. Drop your weapons, Henderson commanded. Now! Gunfire erupted in the small space, deafening and chaotic. Clara pressed herself against the wall as bullets whined through the air above her head. Clara! Daniel's voice cut through the noise. Where are you? Here, she called out. By the fireplace. Strong arms wrapped around her, pulling her toward the door as the gunfight raged behind them. Clara breathed in Daniel's familiar scent of leather and hay, hardly believing he was alive and safe. I thought they'd killed you, she sobbed against his chest. Takes more than a few hired guns to put me down, Daniel replied grimly. Henderson's boy saw them riding toward the house and came to warn me. Outside, the shooting gradually died down. Clara heard Henderson calling out that Morrison's men were either dead or surrendering. It's over, Daniel said softly, holding her close. They can't hurt you anymore. But as Clara listened to the men securing the ranch house, she couldn't shake the feeling that Morrison's defeat was only the beginning. Men with his kind of money and connections didn't give up easily. Her fight for freedom was far from over. Dawn painted the Kansas sky in shades Clara could only imagine as she sat on the front porch steps, Buck's head resting heavily on her lap. The loyal dog had a bandage around his skull, but was already trying to wag his tail every time she spoke to him. Good boy, she murmured, stroking his soft ears. You tried to protect me, didn't you? Daniel emerged from the house, his footsteps heavy with exhaustion. He'd spent the night dealing with the territorial marshal who'd come to investigate the shooting, giving statements and filling out reports about Morrison's attempted kidnapping. What's the word? Clara asked as he settled beside her on the steps. Morrison's alive but hurt bad, Daniel replied. The marshal's charging him with kidnapping, attempted murder, and a handful of other crimes. He'll be going to prison for a long time. Clara felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. And my stepfather? Ran off the moment the shooting started. Left Morrison and his men to face the consequences alone. Typical, Clara said bitterly. Henry never was brave enough to face the results of his choices. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher over the prairie. In the distance, Clara could hear the Henderson family cleaning up the damage from the night's violence. Broken glass being swept up, bullet holes being patched, furniture being set right. "Clara," Daniel said finally, his voice careful and measured, "we need to talk about what happens next." Clara's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Last night proved that your inheritance makes you a target. There will always be men like Morrison who see you as easy money, especially with me around to complicate their plans." Clara turned toward his voice, wishing desperately she could see his face. "What are you saying?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Maybe you should take that money and go somewhere safe. Somewhere far from Kansas, where nobody knows about your inheritance or your past. Without you," Clara's heart clenched. "I can't protect you from every greedy man in the territory," Daniel said softly. "Last night they almost succeeded. Next time we might not be so lucky." Clara stood up abruptly, Buck whimpering as she disturbed his rest. She paced to the porch railing, her hands gripping the wood so tight her knuckles went white. "Is that what you want?" she asked. "For me to leave?" "What I want doesn't matter," Daniel replied. "Your safety is more important than my feelings." "My safety," Clara repeated. "But what about my happiness? What about the life we've built here together?" She heard Daniel stand up behind her, his boots crossing the porch. "Clara." "No, listen to me," she interrupted, turning to face him. "For 17 years, other people made decisions about my life. My stepmother decided I was a burden. My stepfather decided I was worth $50. Marcus decided I was property to be owned." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "You decided I was worth saving. I decided I was worth more than their opinions. We decided to build a life together." Daniel's hand touched her shoulder gently. "But if staying here puts you in constant danger, then we face that danger together," Clara said firmly. "As partners, as husband and wife." She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the rough stubble on his cheeks, the warmth of his skin. "Daniel, I've been thinking about something all night. That money my father left me. It's not just my inheritance. It's my weapon." "What do you mean?" Clara smiled, a plan forming in her mind. "What if we used it to make ourselves too powerful to attack? What if we bought more land, hired more hands, built something so strong that men like Morrison wouldn't dare come after us?" Daniel was quiet, considering her words. "That's a lot of money to risk." "It's my money to risk," Clara pointed out. "And I'd rather risk it building a future with you than spend it running from my past alone." She heard Daniel take a shaky breath. "You're sure? Really sure? Because once we start down this path, there's no going back to a simple life." Clara thought about the wooden bird in her pocket, about her mother's words about finding your way home. She thought about the past months of learning to cook and tend animals and be part of something bigger than herself. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said. "This ranch, this life, this is where I belong. This is who I choose to be." Daniel's arms came around her then, holding her close against his chest. "In that case, Mrs. Crenshaw, we've got some planning to do." Mrs. Crenshaw. Clara loved the sound of that name, the way it made her feel like she belonged to something good and strong and lasting. "What kind of planning?" she asked. "The kind that turns a small cattle ranch into the biggest spread in 3 counties, Daniel replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "The kind that makes sure nobody ever thinks they can push us around again." As they stood together on the porch, Clara felt something shift inside her. She was no longer the frightened girl who'd been sold at auction or the desperate woman who'd accepted rescue from a stranger. She was Clara Crenshaw, rancher's wife, business partner, and a woman who'd learned that true sight came not from the eyes but from the courage to see herself clearly. The sun climbed higher over the Kansas prairie, warming her face with the promise of a new day. In the distance, she could hear cattle lowing, horses nickering, and the endless whisper of wind through grass. It was the sound of home, the sound of a future she'd chosen for herself. And for the first time in her life, Clara could see it all perfectly.